Hello everyone. This video will explain what is exception handling in Python and how do we handle exceptions in Python. So the first question is, what does it mean by exception? An exception is an error that occurs when a program is running, causing the program to abruptly halt. For example, let's say I want to divide two numbers. Okay, so I want to write a program to divide two numbers. So I'll write a program for that. Let's say I'm going to ask a user to enter number one. That is, I'm going to ask the user to enter number one. And I'm going to ask the user to enter the second number. Right, and we'll print the division of two numbers. So enter number one, then I'm going to ask the user to enter number two. Okay, and then I'm going to print the division of these two numbers. I'm going to say print f string. I'm going to say number one divide by number two equals to, and I'm going to say number one divided by number two. Okay, now see, when I run this code, so herein I'll have to call this function main, right? Now when I run this code, it will ask me to enter number one and ask me to enter number two. So let's say 10, and the second number I'll enter is 5, and it is printing correctly, right? Now see, I'll run it again, and now what I will do is I'll enter 10 as the first number and I'll enter 0 as the second number, and now see what has happened. Okay, so you're getting an error. The program has abruptly halted. Okay, instead of getting gracefully terminated, the program is halted abruptly or terminated abruptly. That is what is exception. So if you'll see here, an exception is an error that occurs when a program is running, causing the program to abruptly halt. So when I put 0 over here for the second number, what happened? I got a trace back, which says that error, that is 0 division error, division by 0. Okay, and the program has abruptly stopped. And we don't want to do that. Okay, so whenever you are coding, our motive should be gracefully handle the errors. Okay, and that we can do using the try except statement. What does it do? It gracefully handle exceptions. So if we'll talk about exception, it's an error which occurs when the program is running, causing the program to abruptly halt. You can use the try catch or try except statement to gracefully handle exceptions. Okay. Now, there could be different ways to gracefully handle this exception, and the way we can handle this is, I'm going to say herein, I'm going to say if number 2 is not equals to 0, then print this, right? Else you are going to write, that cannot divide by 0. Okay, anything divided by 0 is infinity, right? So that is what is halting the program. So one way to handle this exception is by careful coding, wherein you're going to write if number 2 is not equals to 0, then perform the division, else print that number 2 cannot be 0, cannot divide by 0, right? So I'm going to run this and let's see now with this change, does it work? Number 1 is 10. Number 2, if I put it as 0, it is gracefully terminating the code by saying that cannot divide by 0. Okay, or you can also write that number 2 cannot be 0. And what about if I put the normal inputs? So for example, if I'll put 10 and if I'll put 2, and it is printing correctly. right? So one way to handle exception is this one, okay? But there are certain ways wherein you cannot avoid that using coding, okay? In certain situations, you cannot avoid this using coding. For example, let's see such an example here, okay? So let's say I'm gonna write a code to ask a user to enter the hourly rate and the number of hours worked, and accordingly I'm going to print the salary. So I'm going to say okay, so I'm going to create a variable number of hours or hours worked. Okay, I'm going to say hours worked equals to, let's say, float, and I'm going to say input, enter the number of hours worked, right? And then I'll say hourly pay rate, right? So I'm gonna say pay rate equals to, I'm gonna ask the user to enter it. So I'm gonna say input, enter the hourly pay rate, right? And now I'm gonna calculate the gross pay. So I'm gonna say gross pay equals to hours worked times pay rate, right? And I'm gonna display it. So I'm gonna say print, I'm gonna say gross pay, and I'm gonna put gross pay. Okay, so let's call this function. So I'm gonna run it. It's asking me to enter the hours worked, right? So let me enter the hours worked, and let's say 40. Hourly pay rate is $20, and the salary without tax is 40 times 20, that is 800, and it is printing correctly, right? So, okay, so it is printing correctly. Okay, now let's say, let me run it again, okay? And let's say this time the person enter it as, the hour works as 40 in words, like this. Okay, so here on he has entered in words, and now see you're getting a traceback, an error. It's saying it's a value error, could not convert string to float, right? So it has raised an exception. Now I mean, we could write a code to avoid this as well, but most of the time, there are certain situations in which you cannot avoid it through coding. Okay, so if, for example, if I want to avoid this using coding, I would check whether the number entered by the user is a number or a word. Okay, I could check it like that, but again, I'll have to write a lot of code for that. It's better that we handle it through exception handling. Okay, so what is an exception? Error that causes a program to halt. What is a traceback? Traceback is the error message. So what you see here, zero division error, it is a traceback. You see here as well, right? In this program as well. Herein, you got a traceback. See here, it's a traceback. It's a message that you get when an error occurred, right? Could not convert string to float. That is a traceback. So most of the time, exception can be handled by careful coding, but at times when it cannot be handled by careful coding, what you're going to do is you're going to use a try except clause, okay? That is, you're going to write a code for exception handling. How do you handle exception in Python? So you write a code for exception handling, and the way you write it is you write a try keyword, okay? You put a colon after it, okay? And whatever you want to execute, okay? So for example, whatever is the successful execution will come here. Okay, your Python statements will come here. Okay, if the exception happens, you're going to write except and you're going to write the exception name. Okay, and again, your statements will come here. Okay, and that's how you handle exceptions in Python using try except block. Okay, now let's see it through coding. Okay, so we handle exception using try except block. Let's see how to use it in a coding, and we call it as an exception handling. So for example, in this code which I wrote for calculating the salary, I would say try. So here, okay. I'll say try this. Okay, try this. If the exception happens, okay, put it in the except, and you're gonna say except value error. Okay, except value error, and herein I'm gonna write print. I'm gonna say number of hours worked. Number of hours worked should be a number. Okay, and not string or not word. Okay, or I'll just leave it like this. Okay, that number of hours worked should be a number. Okay, let's see whether this works or not. Okay, so your machine is going to try this. If it sees an invalid input, what would it do? It will raise this exception. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna run this. And it is saying enter the number of hours worked, and I'll type 40. And numbers of worked should be a number. You see this? Okay, let's see the normal execution. So herein when it asks to enter the number of hours worked, and if I'll enter 40, enter the hourly pay rate, and I'll enter 20, and now it is working fine. So what does the try block do? So try will try the normal execution. If it says anything abnormal or anything that is not in the proper format, it will raise the exception. That is, it will come here. Okay, it will directly jump here and will execute this statement. Okay, and will terminate, of course, will terminate the program with grace, right? If you do not know that it is going to raise a value error, okay, if you are not sure about what type of error will it raise, okay, or maybe you do not want to print it in this way, okay, so in that you can display exceptions default error message. Okay, so what is a default error message and how do you do that? Okay, so default error message, for example, when we did this program, we got a message here, zero division error. So this was a default error message. Okay, now if you do not want to print anything here, you can also display the default error message. The way it works is you're gonna say accept value error as ERR, let's say any variable. You don't have to necessarily write ERR, okay? You can write any variable here and you write print ERR here, okay? Now see, when you run this code, enter number of hours worked, and let's say I'll write it as 40, and see it is printing the default message. Okay, that is in its own internal library. And what does it say? Could not convert string to float, right? And this is how exception works. Many times exception handling code is being written when you handle files, okay? So many times if the file does not exist, you're gonna write an exception handling code to handle the error gracefully, okay? So for example, let's say I will write a code here, okay, for file. So herein I'm gonna write a code for opening a file. Let's say I'm gonna ask a user to enter a file name. Okay, I'm gonna say input, enter a file name. Okay, enter a file name. And I'm gonna say, we have seen this, right? So in file equals to open, and I'm gonna write this file name and we'll open it in the read mode. So I'm writing a code assuming that the file already exists. Okay, and I'm gonna open that file and read the content in it, right? So I'm gonna say in file is equals to open file name R, and I'm gonna say for in file, let's say print I. Okay, or for line in file, let's say for each line in file, I'm gonna say print each file. Okay, let's save it. Let's save the code. I'm gonna save it in the same working directory in which I created the file. So I have these files over here. Okay, so I'm gonna say exception demo. Okay, is the name of my program, and it is in the same working directory. So if you'll see, my working directory is over here, and I have this names.txt file, right? So let's see first the normal execution of this code. So I'm gonna run this code. Okay, so I'm gonna run this code first. Let's run this code. Okay, the code did not run because I did not call the main function, right? So I'm gonna call the function. And now let's run the code. So I'm gonna run the code and enter a file name. Let's say names.txt, and it is executing properly, right? It is working correctly because my file of names.txt has this data Jacob, Joseph, and Jennifer, and that is what it is displaying, right? But if the file name that I provide does not exist, then what will happen? So now let's run the code for that and check, okay? So I'm gonna run the code, and here and it is asking me for a file name, and I'm giving a file name that does not exist. I'm gonna say names2.txt, and let's see if, oh, it already exists. Okay, so I'm gonna say name3.txt and see I got an error. File not found error, no such file or directory name names3.txt, right? So how will you handle that? Now here, the try except block comes. So I'm gonna say try opening the file. So try opening the file and display its content. Okay. If you do not find, then raise the exception. Right? And which exception it is saying? It is file not found error. So I'm gonna say file not found error. Okay. And I'm gonna print file name does not exist. Okay. Okay, why it is giving, okay, yeah, because I did not indent it over here. Okay, now let's run the code. Now enter a file name, and I'm gonna say names3.txt, and see, file name does not exist, right? If we'll see this as ERR, and if I'll just print an ERR, okay, so I'm just gonna print ERR, it will print the default message. We just saw how does it print that default message, right? I'm just gonna comment this. Let's run this. Okay, and here in, let's say names3.txt, and no such file or directory names3.txt. It is now printing its default message, right? And does it also support the normal execution? Let's check. So this time I'm gonna give a valid name of the file, and it is printing the file, right? And that's how the try except work and the exception handling works in Python. Okay, but there is one more thing that is there, and that is called as finally. Okay, so finally is a block that even if the exception is not raised, and if you want to still print something, you will use a finally block. Okay, so the try except statement may include an optional finally clause which appears after all the except clauses. It is aligned with try and except clause. General format is finally, and then you just write the statement. So it's an optional clause, okay, like this, okay. And then let's say I'm gonna write print, I am done executing this code. Okay, it's just that performing a cleanup before executing. Okay, so let's see, enter a file name, and I'm gonna write a file name. Let's say names dot, okay, let's say names dot txt. Okay, and see, so irrespective of whether the exception occurs or not, the finally block will always execute. Okay, this always execute irrespective of whether the exception has happened or occurred or raised or not. For example, let's say I'm gonna say names4.txt, which does not exist, and see, it is raising the error, but it is also executing what is being written in the finally clause, okay, or the finally block. So finally block is generally used uh, for cleanup before exiting the code. Okay, so that's all about try except. And as I said, during file handling and many situations, you're gonna encounter many programming situations wherein you cannot write a code to gracefully terminate your program or handle exception. Therein, you're gonna use a try except block. It is a very good practice in coding to use a try except block to prevent the code from abruptly halting or abruptly terminating. And I hope that is being clear to you. And I'm going to conclude this session here. Happy coding.